She hadn't spoken a word since the arrest. The girl stood in the wooden box meant for witnesses and criminals, her wrists raw where the rope had been. No one dared meet her eyes, but all of Raven's Hollow had come to see her fall. The courthouse groaned with heat and silence. Outside, horses stomped at the hitching posts and flies buzzed at the windows. Inside, tension curled thick in the air, like gunpowder waiting for a match. The sheriff stood stiff near the judge's bench, hat crushed between his hands. Found her outside the church kitchen. Bread in her coat. Said she was hungry. A murmur went through the room. Mrs. Hawthorne, bonnet tight and lips tighter, leaned toward her husband and hissed something righteous. The baker's wife looked down at her lap, ashamed to be seen watching. The girl didn't flinch. She only stared straight ahead at the floorboards, dirt caked beneath her fingernails, a dark bruise blooming above her collarbone. Her name was Delaney Quinn, or so the record said. She hadn't confirmed it herself. She hadn't denied it either. No one really knew where she'd come from. Just that she'd shown up a year back working at the old boarding house outside town, until rumors began to ripple like snakes in the rivergrass. A man had visited her room. Late. Then another. Whispers turned to stares. Stares turned to spit near her boots. The widow who ran the place cast her out without a final paycheck. Now here she was, in front of Judge Merrick, accused not of theft, but of causing public scandal, corrupting moral order, and enticing God-fearing men with indecent conduct. The charges were vague, but the town liked it that way. Vagueness gave room to hate. The judge adjusted his spectacles and cleared his throat. Miss Quinn, the charges presented carry no formal jail sentence, but the people of Raven's Hollow demand some form of consequence. We are not a lawless settlement. Delaney didn't speak. I'm giving you a chance, the judge said, a bit softer. Do you have anyone who will speak for your character? A husband, a father, anyone. Still, she said nothing. Mrs. Hawthorne sniffed loud enough for the room to hear. Course she don't. Girls like that grow wild and rootless. Like weeds. Delaney looked up slowly. Not at the judge. Not at the people. But toward the far wall, as if hearing something behind it. The judge leaned back in his chair, preparing to pass judgment. Very well. In absence of testimony, the court will. The back door creaked. Every head turned. Even Delaney's. A man stepped in, dusty and tall, with a wide-brimmed hat in his hands. He moved without urgency, boots scuffing the old pine floor. His eyes were the color of riverstone, his beard thick with gray dust, his shoulders broad but slumped like he'd carried something too long. Some recognized him. Most didn't. He stopped just beside the courtroom benches, took a breath, and said, "She is my wife." No one moved. Even the judge stilled. "I beg your pardon?" Merrick asked, narrowing his eyes. The man stepped forward. "Name's Jonas Thorne. Ranches out past Bitterroot Hollow. I filed papers with the circuit clerk 2 days ago. It's real legal. Prove it." He reached into his coat and slid a folded sheet from a pocket lined with hay and worn thread. The judge took it, unfolding the paper slowly. Silence fell so thick a cough would have echoed like thunder. Delaney stared at the man. Her face didn't register shock. Only quiet confusion, like a door opening onto a view she never expected. Mrs. Hawthorne whispered furiously, "A trap. This is a trap. He's trying to protect her, God knows why." The judge looked between the girl and the man. "Did she agree to this marriage?" Jonas turned to Delaney, finally meeting her eyes. "I asked." She nodded. "When?" "Day before yesterday. Behind the church." "You didn't mention this before," Merrick said, voice low. No one asked. The judge pressed his lips into a line. The town watched, breath held, waiting for their fire. After a long pause, Merrick spoke. "Well, by law, she cannot be punished as a vagrant or seductress if she is now bound by the institution of marriage. If this is truly valid, the charges are null." Another ripple in the room, but not of relief. "She's made a fool of you all," someone muttered from the back. Married her way out of shame. But the judge only nodded once, firm. This court sees no cause to proceed. Dismissed. Jonas turned on his heel without a word, leaving the paper behind. Delaney didn't move until he reached the doorway. Then, slowly, she stepped down from the stand. She did not walk with pride. She walked like someone barefoot on hot coals, quiet, cautious, stunned. The two left together, the heavy doors swinging shut behind them. The wind waited until they were gone to lift through the cracked windows. It smelled of iron, storm, and something burnt. Outside, the street lay still as a painting. Horses blinked in the sun. The gallows creaked, though no one was near it. Delaney stood beside Jonas's horse but didn't mount. She looked at him. Why? He didn't answer. Just took the reins, handed her the stirrup, and waited. She climbed up. As they rode out of town, folks leaned on their porches watching. Some with scorn. Some with something quieter. Like regret. Like memory. Neither Delaney nor Jonas spoke. But halfway down the ridge, when the town was only roofs behind them, she spoke for the first time that day. I don't know how to be a wife. Jonas replied without looking back. Good. I don't need one. She blinked. He added, softer, I just need someone to stay. Thunder rolled far in the east, behind the ridges. The rain hadn't yet begun, but the sky was heavy with it. And for the first time in weeks, Delaney didn't feel hunted. She didn't feel claimed either. She felt spared. The road stretched ahead, lined with whispering pines and scorched gold brush. His coat still hung loose around her shoulders. Her name was no longer being said behind her back. It was riding quietly beside her, unsaid, but known. And that was something she'd never had before. The barn smelled of old wood and silence. Delaney stood just inside the threshold, holding the shawl he'd given her. Coarse wool, clean, but worn soft at the edges like something once loved. The storm had started not long after they crossed the hollow, a quiet sort of rain that tapped on the roof like fingers on a table. She had not thanked him, and he had not asked her to. Jonas Thorne had shown her the ladder to the hayloft, nodded once, and walked out again. That was all. Now the hours passed like syrup. Delaney sat on a pile of burlap sacks, listening to the creak of beams and the steady breath of the horse below. Her fingers ran over the shawl again and again. Beneath the wool was a weight in her chest she didn't know what to do with. She did not understand him. Men were never quiet without reason. They always wanted something. She waited for that part. But he hadn't even looked at her like a man. Not in the way others had. He'd seen her in that courtroom and claimed her like a fact, not a desire. Like her presence required no justification at all. And that terrified her more than hunger or cold ever had. When the light dimmed beyond the slats, she heard footsteps again. Not rushed. Measured. Deliberate. She tensed, but did not hide. Jonas appeared in the open doorway, a lantern swinging low in one hand, the other carrying a tin plate of food. He didn't speak. Just handed it over with a quiet glance toward the ladder. Delaney stared at the stew. You don't have to feed me, she said, voice dry from disuse. You married me, he replied, setting the lantern down. It's the least I can do. I didn't mean to. You just said it. I did, he agreed. But you didn't say no. She couldn't argue that. He moved to a corner of the barn, picked up a pitchfork, and began to fork hay into the trough. His movements were slow, not sluggish, just practiced. Every gesture seemed shaped by years alone. Delaney nibbled at the bread. Finally, she asked, Why me? Jonas didn't turn around. I saw you behind the church 2 days ago. You looked like you hadn't been seen in years. Just watched. I wasn't begging. I didn't say you were. He finished his work, leaned the pitchfork back against the wall, and stretched out his shoulders like a man whose body carried too many winters. Delaney chewed slowly. You didn't tell me your name. Jonas Thorne. You don't talk much, Jonas Thorne. He gave a quiet hum of agreement, then lifted the lantern and moved to leave. At the door, he paused. You can sleep in the loft. Blankets clean. There's no lock on the barn. But it's dry. You can stay. And after that? He looked back. His eyes weren't soft, but they weren't cruel either. Stay as long as you need. Long as you want. Then he stepped out into the storm. Delaney didn't sleep much. She lay awake, watching water trace silver lines across the rafters. Once, she heard him outside, pulling a tarp over a fence post. Rain soaking his shirt. Still saying nothing. That silence wrapped around her like a second blanket, unfamiliar, but not unwelcome. The next morning, the smell of coffee drew her out of the loft. She hesitated at the barn door before stepping into the yard. It was still gray, the mud thick from last night's storm. Smoke curled from the chimney of the small cabin just across the yard. She crossed slowly, boots squelching in the earth. He was already at the stove when she stepped inside. The cabin was small. One room, one bed, one table. Clean, but lived in. She saw a shawl hanging by the door that wasn't hers, and a photograph on the mantel of a woman with a crooked smile and hair pinned back like hers never was. Jonas didn't turn. Just gestured to the table. Got eggs. And more bread. Whose picture? My wife. Before. Delaney froze. You didn't say you were a widower. You didn't ask. She sat slowly. How'd she die? Fever. 2 winters ago. Delaney looked around again. Everything was quiet, but nothing about this space felt forgotten. It felt paused. She took a bite of bread. It was warm. And he'd spread jam on it. Why'd you do it? She asked again, more softly this time. In front of all those people. You don't even know me. Jonas sat across from her. His elbows rested on the table, hands clasped. I know what it feels like to be watched and talked about but never heard. I know what it feels like to want to be somewhere no one knows your name. Her throat caught. Jonas stood after a moment, picked up his coat, and said, I need to mend fence on the north line. You can stay in or help. Your choice. Delaney stood too. I'll help. They didn't speak again for over an hour. The fence was old, the nails stubborn. She held the posts steady while he hammered. A hawk circled overhead, screaming at the wind. She watched him in the corner of her eye, how he worked with care, never wasting motion. Not once did he snap at her, not once did he touch her. Later, she tried to thank him again. He only nodded. That night, she lit a second lantern beside his. It flickered against the window pane. She didn't say why. He didn't ask. 3 days passed like that. On the 4th, they went into town. He needed flour. She needed nothing. But she followed. People stared. Of course they did. Mrs. Hawthorne, standing near the fabric bolts, looked her up and down like a child tracking mud across a clean parlor. Jonas, she said coolly, how generous of you to take her in. He didn't reply. Delaney shifted behind him, chin lowered. Careful, Mrs. Hawthorne continued. Girls like that wear down men like you. Guilt don't make a good marriage. Jonas turned slowly. No, but mercy does. Mrs. Hawthorne paled. They left the store in silence. But on the way back, Delaney asked, do you believe in mercy? I believe people get tired of watching each other suffer. That night, Jonas was feverish. The rain had caught him during fence work, and he'd come in shaking. Delaney made stew without asking. Sat beside his bed with a book she couldn't really read, sounding out words to fill the quiet. He mumbled once in his sleep. A woman's name. Not hers. She stayed anyway. At dawn, she folded the shawl by the door and put it away. Hers now. She swept the floor. She warmed water and left it for him to wash. She didn't knock. She just did it. That evening, as the sun broke through the gray, she went out and sat on the porch. Her hands rested in her lap. For the first time, they weren't clenched. Jonas joined her with a limp in his stride, a blanket around his shoulders. They didn't talk, but they sat, until hoofbeats broke the stillness. A rider thundered up the hill, dust streaming behind him. Delaney stood, heart skipping. Jonas reached for the rifle leaning by the wall but didn't raise it. The rider pulled up fast. A young man, barely 20, panting. "They're calling for her," he said breathlessly. "Judge's orders. New accusation. Said she stole from a widow before she left town. Wants her back in court." Delaney went cold. Jonas didn't blink. "Who's making the claim?" "Widow Hawthorne. Says she's got proof." Jonas looked at Delaney. She stood there with dirt on her skirt and hair tucked behind one ear, face pale, but gaze steady. "I didn't take anything," she whispered. "I know. But they'll believe her. Maybe." The wind caught the porch roof, whistling soft. Delaney looked toward the road. Then back to the man who'd said, "wife," like it meant protection, not possession. "Do I go?" "I won't make that call," he said. She stepped off the porch. "I'll go," she said. "But not like before." Then she turned to him, breath shallow. You'll come too?" Jonas nodded. He didn't reach for her hand. But he walked beside her down to the barn, and she noticed, for the first time, that they kept the same pace. It wasn't the cold that woke her. It was the silence. Not the kind that comforted, like the hush of dawn or a man who let you eat without asking questions, but a silence that felt alert, listening, waiting for something to snap. Delaney sat up slowly in the loft, breath fogging in the gray barn air. The hay rustled beneath her as she rose, pulling Jonas's patched shawl tighter around her shoulders. Through a gap in the slats, she saw light coming from the cabin window. Too early. Too still. She climbed down without a sound, bare feet practiced in quiet from too many years of hiding. She crossed the yard, mud soft under her soles. Her hands trembled against the door latch before she knocked. She wasn't sure why she knocked. It was habit, maybe. Or guilt. Jonas opened the door already dressed, rifle leaning near the fireplace. "They're coming?" she asked. He nodded. She stepped inside, eyes landing on the plate of bread and jam sitting untouched on the table. "I'm not running," she said quietly. "I didn't ask you to." "I know." She hesitated. "But I needed to say it." Jonas moved toward the fire and added a log, the crackle answering for him. She watched the back of him, broad and familiar now, the way his shoulders dipped slightly when he bent, how his hair curled damp at the edges from last night's rain. He still hadn't asked her to explain. Not once. She hated how much that made her want to. "I didn't steal anything," she said after a long pause. "Not from the widow. Not from anyone." "I believe you," he said simply. Delaney swallowed hard. "But I did lie once," she added. "A long time ago. Told someone I was older than I was so I could stay on at a ranch kitchen. I was 13. Thought if I kept washing dishes, I could save for a train ticket east." Jonas looked over at her, face unreadable. "They found out. The foreman said I owed them for the lie. For the food. For the bunk. He made me pay in other ways. When I left, they said I stole silver." He didn't speak. Didn't flinch. Delaney let the quiet stretch between them, afraid of what she'd see if she looked directly at him. But when she finally did, Jonas wasn't looking at her like she was filth or fragile. He was just listening. He gestured to the bread. "Eat," he said. "We'll leave after." She sat. Outside, the wind tugged at the corners of the porch. The sky was still heavy with the last of the storm, but the clouds were thinning. After they ate, Jonas hitched the wagon instead of taking the horse. He didn't explain, but she understood. This time, she wouldn't ride behind like cargo. She would sit beside him, upright, her dress clean, her hands still. The road into Raven's Hollow was quiet that morning, but every window watched. Faces moved behind curtains. The old man whittling on the porch didn't lift his eyes as they passed, but the twitch in his jaw betrayed that he saw. They reached the courthouse steps just as the church bell rang for morning prayer. Inside, Judge Merrick stood waiting, robes rumpled as if he hadn't slept well either. Mrs. Hawthorne was already there, lips pressed into a cruel little victory. A paper in her gloved hand, trembling from either rage or excitement. "She stole a brooch," she said to the judge. "A family heirloom. I found it missing the day she left my employ." Delaney stepped forward. "Then where is it?" Mrs. Hawthorne blinked. "You tell us. You probably sold it." "You said it was priceless," Delaney replied, voice calm. "But you never reported it stolen. You just waited until you could use it." Judge Merrick frowned. "That is true, Widow Hawthorne. You never brought this to my attention when the girl was first tried." "She fled," the woman snapped. "Disappeared. And now she shows up with a husband like a shield." Jonas took a step forward. "Not a shield. A witness." The judge raised an eyebrow. "You have something to offer, Mr. Thorne?" Jonas pulled a small folded cloth from his coat. Inside it, a brooch, tarnished, floral, and unmistakably old. He laid it gently on the judge's desk. "I found this in the hayloft 2 nights ago. My loft. Not hers. She didn't even know it was there." Mrs. Hawthorne gasped. "That's not possible." "I bought a load of feed from your stable hand last week," Jonas said, turning his eyes to the judge. "He used sacks that looked like they hadn't been touched in a year. One of them tore open in my barn. This was in the bottom, wrapped up in an old sock." "Are you accusing me of planting it?" she hissed. "I'm not accusing anyone," he said. "I'm just telling you what I found." The judge examined the brooch. His silence was longer this time. When he finally looked up, his expression was unreadable. "Miss Quinn, did you take the brooch?" "No, sir." "Did you know it was in the barn?" "No." He nodded once. "Well, that settles it." Mrs. Hawthorne's voice rose. "You're dismissing this? After what she's done? After what she is?" "I'm dismissing it because you lied," Merrick said flatly. "And next time, widow, I'll fine you for slander." He slammed the gavel once, the sound echoing across the rafters like a shot. Court dismissed. Delaney's knees nearly gave way. But she didn't cry. Not yet. Not here. They walked out together in the same silence that had always followed them, but this time it felt different. It didn't carry shame. It carried something older, heavier, earned. As they crossed the dusty road toward the wagon, Jonas said, "She'll talk." Delaney nodded. "They all will. Do you care?" She thought about it. About all the years she tried to disappear, to survive. About the girls still working kitchens with bare feet and no last names. "No," she said. "I don't." Back at the ranch, the wind picked up again. The scent of rain clung to the wood, but the sun was pressing through in slivers, touching everything gold. Jonas untied the horse in silence. Delaney watched him, then stepped past the threshold of the barn into the cabin. She reached for the shawl and hung it by the door again, not as something borrowed, but as something claimed. There were no locks in the house. Not on the door. Not on the cabinets. Not on the inside of her room. That night, she opened the window beside her cot and let the breeze carry in the sounds of the prairie, owls calling, coyotes in the distance, the hush of grass. For the first time, she fell asleep without boots by the door or a bag packed under the bed. Somewhere in the dark, Jonas walked past her room to check the hearth. She didn't open her eyes. But she heard the quiet click of the fire poker and the creak of the floor. And she heard him pause. He didn't speak. He didn't knock. But she knew he was there, standing like a man who didn't know what to say, but wanted her to know he had stayed. It was enough. By the time the next summons arrived, the wind had changed. It came not by letter, but by boots. 3 men rode up to the ranch just after sunrise, their silhouettes long against the pale morning. No greetings. No pretense. Delaney was feeding the chickens when she saw them dismount. Deputy Hargill in the lead, boots polished, expression stony. "We need her," he said to Jonas, not sparing her a glance. "Today." Delaney wiped her hands and stepped forward. "What is it now?" "Judge wants testimony. Private hearing. Town committees involved." His eyes flicked toward Jonas. "This isn't court. It's inquiry." Jonas said nothing, but Delaney saw the way his jaw tensed. "We'll come together," she said quietly. The deputy didn't argue. The ride back to Raven's Hollow was different than before. Slower. The town didn't leer this time. It watched. Measured. Like a body deciding whether to accept a transplanted heart. Inside the courthouse, the pews were half filled with faces that neither welcomed nor condemned. Just watched. Judge Merrick sat straight, coat buttoned tight, gavel resting like a warning on the table before him. "Delaney Quinn," he said, "you've been summoned to clarify claims raised during the last session. Certain members of the town committee believe there are inconsistencies in your past that warrant further review." Mrs. Hawthorne sat near the front, hands folded too politely, eyes sharp as needles. Delaney nodded once. "I'm here." "We've reviewed testimony," the judge continued. "Some still argue that your marriage was a manipulation, a means to evade legal consequences. Do you have anything to say before we proceed?" Jonas shifted beside her, but she touched his arm gently, signaling, "Let me." "I didn't come here to trick anyone," Delaney said. "And I didn't ask to be saved. I didn't ask for a husband, or a witness, or mercy. But I was given all three." A murmur rippled. "Do you deny your reputation?" the judge asked. "I don't," she said. "I know what they say. That I was a thief, a whore, a liar. That I belonged to men who bought me bread or time or survival. And they're right about one thing. I did survive. But not because of them. Because I kept walking." The room stilled. She turned to face the people directly now. "And I'd keep walking still, if not for a man who gave me nothing but a place to stop." Her voice didn't crack. It didn't rise. But it cut through the chamber like wire. "Mr. Thorne," the judge asked, "do you affirm this marriage was not for your own advantage?" Jonas met the judge's gaze. "I gained nothing. She owed me nothing. That's how I knew it was real." Mrs. Hawthorne rose then, white with fury. "You're going to let this stand? This circus? She fooled you all. I gave that girl work, food, and she left me in shame. Stole my brooch." "I returned it," Jonas said. "You can't prove she didn't plant it. She didn't even know it existed." "I saw what she was," the widow shouted. "She used men. She smiled like she knew better. That's what girls like her do. They make you feel sorry, then they take everything." Delaney didn't flinch. She simply asked, "And what did I take from you, widow? What made you feel so small that you needed me punished to feel clean?" The silence afterward was louder than any verdict. Judge Merrick stood slowly. He reached for the gavel. "I've lived in Raven's Hollow 20 years, he said. "Seen trials, hangings, pardons, and every shade of truth in between. And I've come to learn this. Truth doesn't always come dressed in respectability. Sometimes it's bruised. Sometimes barefoot." He looked at Delaney. Then Jonas. Sometimes the guilty speak louder than the innocent ever could. He raised the gavel. Mrs. Hawthorne opened her mouth. But before she could speak again, the judge brought it down hard. Crack. It split. The head of the gavel snapped clean from the handle and rolled off the bench like a fallen tooth. The courtroom gasped. But the judge only looked down at it, then at Delaney. "Well," he said, "seems judgment won't come from me today." He turned to the room. "As far as this court is concerned, this matter is settled. The marriage is valid. The accusations withdrawn. And if I hear one more whisper of slander, I'll remind the town what defamation costs." He stepped away from the bench. The gallery erupted. but not in applause. Just as shifting. Like a town waking up from a long bad dream. A few rose and left in silence. Others stayed, unsure what to feel. Outside, the sky was full of sun but smelled faintly of snow. Delaney stood on the courthouse steps, Jonas beside her. "I didn't expect that," she said. "Which part?" "All of it." Jonas looked down the street. "They'll keep watching. I know. They may not ever stop." Delaney turned to him. "Neither will I." He smiled, faintly. It was the first time she'd seen it. It wasn't perfect. It was a little crooked, like the world. But it was real. They walked back to the wagon without hurry. The wind rose behind them, curling dust in long golden spirals across the street. But the town, those who watched, didn't spit this time. They didn't wave either. But one man tipped his hat. A quiet old rancher on a bench, his hand trembling slightly. Delaney saw it. And something in her, something cracked and quiet, shifted. Back at the ranch, they didn't speak much. He unhitched the wagon. She made coffee. The fire burned brighter than usual, and the wind slid past the walls like it had somewhere else to be. Later that night, she sat by the window, legs tucked beneath her, the shawl resting across her lap. Jonas walked past her once with his usual silent step. Paused. She turned. He looked tired. "But steady," she said. "I can sleep inside now. If that's all right." He nodded once. She rose, brushed the dust from her dress, and stepped toward the bedroom without waiting for him to lead. The door didn't close behind her. And the night didn't press so heavy anymore. There was still shame in her bones, sure, but it had stopped being hers alone. Somewhere in town, the broken gavel still lay on a desk like a reminder that sometimes justice comes not in full force, but in something gentler. A refusal to condemn. And in the days to follow, when folks asked who she was, the answer changed. Not because she said it out loud, but because the man beside her never stopped standing there, silent and sure. And because she no longer lowered her eyes when someone looked too long. You see, justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it just shows up, keeps quiet, and stays. That's how Raven's Hollow learned that not every woman has to beg for grace. Some just need someone who doesn't flinch. Which city are you watching our video from? Please leave a comment. Please subscribe to the channel as well. Thank you.